Did something truly unearthly fall from the sky over New Mexico in the summer of 1947? Why did the United States Army first announce the recovery of a flying disc, only to deny it hours later? And what really happened to the wreckage that so many witnesses swore was not of this earth? In the days after a violent storm outside the town of Roswell, ranchers, soldiers, and local families found themselves caught in a mystery that would echo for generations. Was it a secret military project, a weather balloon, or something far stranger? Tonight, we'll explore the entire history of the Roswell Incident. Before you settle in, take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if this kind of quiet storytelling truly helps you relax and unwind. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Share where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. I really enjoy reading what you write, and it's comforting to see people from all around the world gathering here, slowly winding down side by side, even though we're far apart. Now, make yourself comfortable. Dim the lights, and if you'd like, switch on a fan or a little white noise for that steady background hum that helps the world fade away. Let your breathing slow, let your body relax, and together we'll drift into tonight's story at an easy, gentle pace.
Chapter 1. The 1947 UFO sightings and the rancher's discovery. It's the summer of 1947, a time when America felt wide awake and perhaps a little afraid. World War II was over, but a new kind of tension had arrived, something they called the Cold War. The United States was the only nation with nuclear weapons, and there was deep concern that the Soviets were trying to build their own. This created a huge appetite for secrecy, especially in places like New Mexico, which was the beating heart of America's atomic projects. The town of Roswell itself was central to this national secret. It was home to a very elite military unit, the 509 Bomber Group. They were the only group in the world equipped with the atomic bomb, meaning the military base there was essentially always on full alert. People in this region were known to be incredibly patriotic, supportive of everything the military did, and intensely focused on keeping secrets safe. But by the summer of that year, 1947, America had another new worry. Something buzzing across the headlines: flying objects. It started just a few weeks earlier in June, with an event that gave the objects their famous name. A respected pilot named Kenneth Arnold was flying over Washington State when he reported seeing 9 shiny objects moving quickly through the sky. Supportive of everything the military did, and intensely focused on keeping secrets safe. But by the summer of that year, 1947, America had another new worry. Something buzzing across the headlines: flying objects. It started just a few weeks earlier in June with an event that gave the objects their famous name. A respected pilot named Kenneth Arnold was flying over Washington State when he reported seeing 9 shiny objects moving quickly through the sky. He told reporters that the objects moved in a strange way, like a teacup saucer skipping across the surface of a lake. And just like that, the term flying saucer was born. It didn't take long for the reports to increase in number. Hundreds of sightings were reported, and people started calling it a mass hysteria. Not surprisingly, much of this mysterious aerial activity seemed to center right over New Mexico, the very spot where America held its biggest military secrets. People worried that someone else was very interested in the nation's military potential. By late June, the sightings became intense. Residents in the southern part of the state were spooked by nearly 70 sightings of these fast-moving aerial phenomena. Witnesses described bright objects, often moving quickly across the sky, but they weren't acting like falling stars or meteorites. Local Sheriff George Wilcox started receiving dozens of calls from folks who were confused and nervous about what they were seeing. Then, in early July, something much more dramatic occurred. On the evening of July 2nd, the New Mexico desert experienced a severe lightning storm. This area often sees rough weather, but this was a particularly violent electrical event. Ranchers would sometimes stand outside to watch where the rain shafts came down, because their livestock needed the water. Witnesses later described hearing a sound between the thunderclaps, something that sounded like an explosion. Some reported seeing a large, pulsating light in the northern sky. A few days later, a local rancher named Mac Brazel was out on the Foster Ranch. He was the foreman of that ranch, checking on his sheep and trying to get them to water. What he stumbled across was unlike anything he'd ever seen before. Brazel found a massive debris field. It wasn't a small pile, but a huge area covered in strange wreckage. One researcher would later say it stretched nearly a mile long and was a couple of 100 feet wide. Mac was mainly annoyed by the mess. The material was spread out so extensively that he had to drive his sheep around it, because the animals wouldn't cross the area. Brazel collected some pieces of this wreckage. He took samples to his closest neighbors, Floyd and Loretta Proctor. Loretta Proctor would become the first person outside of the ranch to see this odd material. The physical nature of the debris was the strangest part of the story. Brazel described metallic-looking material that was paper-thin, but unlike normal metal or foil, it was practically weightless. Even more unusual, you couldn't cut it. If you took a piece and crumpled it up into a ball, it would immediately straighten itself right back out again. It was like a memory metal, or just a lot tougher than normal tinfoil. The Proctors, having read the headlines about the new phenomenon, suggested to Mac that he should probably report the debris, saying it might be one of those UFOs they'd been reading about. So, Mac Brazel made the long 75-mile drive into Roswell. On Sunday, July 6th, 1947, the rancher arrived at the office of Sheriff George Wilcox. Mac brought in 2 boxes filled with the wreckage. The sheriff, after handling the strange material himself, immediately recognized that this was a serious matter. It was urgent enough that he called the Roswell Army Airfield to let them know about the debris. The commander of the base, Colonel William Blanchard, took the call seriously. He was a highly decorated military pilot. He promptly dispatched his chief intelligence officer, Major Jesse Marcel. Major Marcel was told to go investigate the strange report. Marcel was accompanied by an agent for Army counterintelligence, Sheridan Cavett. They set off to meet Rancher Brazel. The following morning, Monday, July 7th, Major Marcel and the agent arrived at the debris field with Mac Brazel. The sheer amount of wreckage was the first thing that struck Major Marcel. He would later claim that there was just so much material scattered across the ground. Marcel and Cavett spent the better part of the day there, looking at the debris and trying to figure out exactly what it was. As the sun began to set, Marcel began gathering up different pieces of the unusual material and putting them into boxes to load into the trunk of his car. He knew that the moment this material crossed the front gate of the Roswell Army Airfield, it would instantly be classified as top secret. But what he did next was a serious breach of military rules, something uncharacteristic of an officer sworn to secrecy. As he made the drive back to the base, Major Marcel stopped at his home. It was late, maybe around 2 o'clock in the morning, and he was very excited. He woke up his wife and his 11-year-old son, Jesse Jr., because he felt the material was so strange, so unusual, and so significant that he just had to show them what he believed were parts of a flying saucer. He spread the pieces out on the kitchen floor for his family to see. And that's where the story of the cover-up truly begins. Chapter 2. Major Marcel's Wreckage Analysis and the Army Air Force press release. Now let's return to the New Mexico desert and the days following the rancher's strange discovery. It's Monday morning, July 7th, 1947, and the small town of Roswell is about to enter history. The military was already moving when Sheriff Wilcox called the Army airfield about the wreckage Mac Brazel had brought in. The base commander, Colonel William Blanchard, quickly dispatched his chief intelligence officer, Major Jesse Marcel. Colonel Blanchard himself was a highly decorated military pilot. In fact, he had previously supervised the mission of the famous plane, the Enola Gay, that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima back in 1945. Blanchard commanded the 509th Bomber Group, which was the only nuclear-equipped bomber squadron in the world at that time. So when something unusual crashed in the desert, this base was always on full alert. Major Marcel, a seasoned intelligence officer who had earned 2 air medals and a Bronze Star during World War II, was the right man for the job. He was accompanied by Sheridan Cavett, an agent for Army counterintelligence. Marcel and Cavett arrived at the debris field with Mac Brazel that Monday morning. The sheer scale of the wreckage was the first thing that struck Major Marcel. He later described the debris field as massive, stretching almost a mile long and a couple of 100 feet wide. Major Marcel and Cavett spent the better part of the day examining the debris, trying to figure out what it was. At that point, the material had already been out there for days, which suggested to some that it clearly wasn't American military equipment, because if it were, someone would have been looking for it already. Marcel collected various pieces of the debris, carefully placing them into boxes and loading them into his car. Cavett concentrated on the general area of the wreckage, while Marcel began the long drive back to Roswell. Major Marcel had a long history of protecting military secrets and understood the urgency of his mission. He knew that the very moment the material crossed the front gate of the Roswell Army airfield, it would instantly be classified as top secret. Yet, according to his family, he committed an uncharacteristic breach of military rules on his way back to base. It was late, maybe 2 o'clock in the morning, when Marcel stopped at his home. He was very excited, believing he had found something strange and significant enough to risk his entire career. He woke up his wife and his 11-year-old son, Jesse Jr., because he was convinced he had parts of a flying saucer, and he wanted them to see it. Jesse Jr. later recalled his father bringing in the material and spreading it out on the kitchen floor for them to examine. The descriptions of this material were truly extraordinary. Marcel, who was familiar with almost all materials used in aircraft and air travel, was certain this wreckage wasn't anything from Earth. He saw material that was paper-thin and metal-like, but practically weightless. You couldn't cut it, and you couldn't burn it. If you bent or crumpled it up, it immediately straightened, right back out to its original shape, like memory metal. Jesse Jr. confirmed that the materials were very light and very strong. But the most unusual part of the debris, according to Jesse Jr., was the I-beam fragments. These small I-beams were very light and strong. What set them apart was the writing on the inside surface of them. Jesse Jr. thought the symbols looked like hieroglyphics or some kind of alien writing. Jesse Sr. also described silken strands of material, which some researchers now claim sounded like fiber optics, a technology that wasn't even developed until years later. Jesse Marcel Jr. spent a lifetime thinking about the strange material his father allowed him to handle that night. His father was willing to take a chance with his whole military career just to show his wife and son what he believed he had found. The following morning, Major Marcel arrived at the Roswell Army Airfield for the regular officers' meeting and presented the debris to Colonel Blanchard. Blanchard immediately ordered his public affairs officer, First Lieutenant Walter Haut, to issue an immediate press release. Walter Haut was the base's public relations officer for the 509th Bomb Group. Blanchard instructed Haut to put out a press release that essentially stated that the Army Air Corps had recovered a flying disc. This was the only time in United States history that the government had announced possession at the Roswell Army Airfield for the regular officers' meeting and presented the debris to Colonel Blanchard. Blanchard immediately ordered his public affairs officer, First Lieutenant Walter Haut, to issue an immediate press release. Walter Haut was the base's public relations officer for the 509th Bomb Group. Blanchard instructed Haut to put out a press release that essentially stated that the Army Air Corps had recovered a flying disc. This was the only time in United States history that the government had announced possession of a flying saucer. Blanchard was known by colleagues as someone who was no fool, and he wasn't the kind of man to put out such a dramatic press release without being absolutely certain of his facts. As soon as the story hit the Roswell Daily Record and was broadcast by the local radio station, it went worldwide. Newspapers and radio stations across the nation, and even the world, quickly picked up the incredible news that the widely publicized mystery of the flying saucers might soon be solved. News organizations from New York and London were calling the base, wanting to know more about the recovery of the disc. The press release revealed few details, only mentioning that Major Marcel had recovered the debris and that it was now being sent to higher military headquarters for inspection. It's important to remember that the nation was already buzzing about UFOs. Just a couple of weeks earlier, Kenneth Arnold's sighting had given the phenomenon its name, flying saucer, because the objects moved like a saucer skipping across water. Hundreds of sightings had followed. The news from Roswell gave Americans hope that they would finally have answers about what these mysterious, fast-traveling craft were, and if they were from another world. The news that a flying saucer had been discovered and inspected was the biggest story in the country. However, the Army chain of command immediately took control. Colonel Blanchard ordered Major Marcel to fly the material to Fort Worth, Texas, to present the material to his superior, Brigadier General Roger Ramey, head of the 8th Air Force. Marcel thought he was flying to Fort Worth with pieces of flying saucer debris. But the moment the news hit the wires, the clock started ticking on the cover-up. Just a few hours after the news broke, the Army retracted the story. As soon as Major Marcel arrived at Fort Worth that afternoon, he presented the material to General Ramey. Ramey took Marcel to an adjoining map room. When Marcel and the general returned to the office, the real material was gone, and in its place was a collection of debris from a weather balloon. The cover-up had begun. General Ramey called a press conference, and photos were taken of Marcel, Ramey, and Colonel Thomas Dubose with the pieces of aluminum foil, sticks, and rubber strips, which were claimed to be the real wreckage. The official story now was simple. Mystery solved. It's just a weather balloon device. Nothing to worry about. The press accepted this new explanation, and the story that the flying disc was nothing more than a weather balloon quickly spread throughout the country. General Ramey himself told the newsmen what the material was and to forget about it. Major Marcel was photographed holding the mundane debris. Even though his family says he was forced to go along with the deception, Marcel was the face of the lie in the newspaper. He said he was at liberty to say nothing. All he could do was keep his mouth shut, even though he and General Ramey both knew differently. Marcel claimed he was forced to go along with the cover-up. All personnel at the base were ordered never to talk about what had transpired again. Overnight, one of the greatest headline stories became nothing but a footnote. But Major Marcel knew the truth. He was quite sure that whatever he had found and brought back from the desert was not anything from this earth. Chapter 3. The Official Retraction and Military Witness Intimidation. The Army chain of command acted swiftly to regain control of the narrative. Colonel Blanchard, who had authorized the initial press release, ordered Major Jesse Marcel to fly the recovered material immediately to Fort Worth, Texas. Marcel was to present the wreckage to Brigadier General Roger Ramey, who was the head of the 8th Air Force and Blanchard's commanding officer. Marcel thought he was flying to Fort Worth with pieces of actual flying saucer debris. Major Marcel arrived at the Fort Worth Army Airfield, sometimes called Carswell Army Airfield, approximately around 4 o'clock that afternoon. He presented the material he had collected from the desert to General Ramey. But the moment the news hit the wire, the plan to contain the story had already been set in motion. According to researchers, General Ramey quickly took Marcel to an adjoining map room. When Major Marcel and the general returned to the office, the real, strange debris was gone. In its place, scattered on the floor, was debris from a weather balloon. The cover-up had begun. Within hours of the initial flying disc announcement, the Army called a hasty press conference at Fort Worth. The purpose was simple: to officially retract the dramatic story. General Ramey, with Colonel Thomas Dubose and Major Marcel standing with him, presented the new official explanation. The whole thing was just a mistake, and the debris was nothing more than a high-altitude weather observation balloon. The general made sure the press accepted this new story immediately. Ramey told the newsmen what the material was and to forget about it, claiming that so far as it could be determined, no one had actually seen the object in the air. The press accepted this retraction, and the original story that a flying disc had crashed became nothing but a footnote overnight. Major Marcel was photographed holding the mundane debris, the aluminum foil, rubber strips, sticks, and paper that supposedly came from the weather balloon. This photo placed him at the very center of the lie. Marcel later stated that he was not at liberty to make any comments, and that all he could do was keep his mouth shut. He confirmed that he and General Ramey both knew differently, but he was forced to go along with the cover-up. Marcel later said that General Ramey simply told him, "This is what you're going to do." The military's new message was clear. Mystery solved. It's just a weather balloon device, nothing to worry about. The Army Air Forces decided that the widely publicized mystery was merely a mistake. Meanwhile, back in New Mexico, the military moved to enforce silence on everyone connected to the incident. All personnel at the Roswell Army Airfield were ordered never to talk about what had transpired again. This pressure extended far beyond the base walls and into the desert communities. Mac Brazel, the rancher who first found the wreckage, quickly became the first civilian face of the cover-up. Brazel had initially been eager to be interviewed by the local radio station, KGFL. The morning the military officially retracted the story, the military was waiting for him at the radio station. They effectively arrested Brazel, detaining him and hiding him out at the base for 4 or 5 full days. During his detention, Brazel was denied access to a phone and was subjected to rigorous questioning and intimidation. He later complained that he felt like he was in jail and that they asked him the same questions over and over again, all about a supposed weather balloon. Days later, Mac Brazel was escorted by the military to the local newspapers and radio stations, including KGFL. To the dismay of the reporter, Frank Joyce, Brazel now only described the wreckage as rubber strips, tin foil, some paper, and balsa wood. He claimed he regretted coming forward. Joyce realized what was happening, noting the military police present, and in his frustration, he took the rancher off the air. Brazel's son, Bill, later recalled that his father told him he was told not to tell anyone, saying, "You're probably better off without knowing." Mac Brazel gave his word he wouldn't talk about it. The military report put forward at that time blindsided not only Marcel, but also Mac Brazel, who was known to be familiar with weather balloons. Mac's son later confirmed that his father had said, "It was not a weather balloon." The intimidation tactics used on the witnesses were far more severe than merely asking them to be quiet. Alleged eyewitness accounts suggest that the military swept through Roswell and the nearby small town of Corona, threatening scores of individuals who had heard the story. These local residents were warned to keep quiet, and some were even threatened with being charged with treason, which carried the death penalty. The fear was real in 1947, as people were very patriotic and understood the duty not to talk about anything for government safety. One young civilian witness who faced severe intimidation was Frankie Rowe. Frankie was just 12 years old when her father, a fireman, had told his family about seeing the crashed craft and the small, large-headed bodies. Soon after, a military car drove up to her house. An officer, wearing sunglasses and never taking his hat off, positioned himself across the table from Frankie and her mother. He insisted she had never been to the fire station, had not seen anything, and had not heard any conversation. When Frankie, who had been raised not to lie, insisted she had seen the material, the officer got louder old when her father, a fireman, had told his family about seeing the crashed craft and the small, large-headed bodies. Soon after, a military car drove up to her house. An officer, wearing sunglasses and never taking his hat off, positioned himself across the table from Frankie and her mother. He insisted she had never been to the fire station, had not seen anything, and had not heard any conversation. When Frankie, who had been raised not to lie, insisted she had seen the material, the officer got louder. He took out a stick-like object and began beating it on his hand as he spoke. The officer then issued a terrifying threat. He told them that if she ever talked about it for the rest of her life, the military could and would do things to them. He threatened to take all the children to a POW camp, like the German Orchard Park or the Japanese Artesia camp, and put their parents in the other camp. Worse, he threatened their lives, saying, "We don't even have to let you live, and we'd put you in the middle of the desert where no one will ever find your bodies, ever." The military demanded that she promise never to speak of it for the rest of her life. Frankie made that promise. After the officer left, her mother never spoke about the incident again, and Frankie herself didn't discuss it until many years later. Researchers confirmed that her story is corroborated by her sister and other testimony, which suggests that officials used whatever means necessary to silence people. The family of Sheriff George Wilcox, the man who first called the base, was also targeted. His family was told that if the sheriff talked about the incident, not only would he be killed, but his wife and daughters would be killed as well. The whole family would be wiped out. This wide range of testimonies shows the severe pressure placed on individuals to keep them silent. The military people were often threatened with imprisonment, while civilians faced threats of death and the wiping out of their entire family. With the original debris replaced by a weather balloon and the witnesses effectively silenced by fear, the greatest headline story in the world quickly disappeared from the news. The official word was that they had simply made a mistake, and the story was over. Roswell, which had been a very patriotic town, became a brainwashed town. The people accepted the government's word that it was just a weather balloon. The story lay dormant for decades. But the secret remained hidden in the memories of men like Major Marcel, who swore he was forced to participate in the deception, and in the sheer terror of people like Frankie Rowe, who knew that something truly unusual had fallen from the sky that strange, stormy night in 1947. Chapter 4. Eyewitness accounts of recovered alien craft and bodies. The story of Roswell doesn't end with the debris found far out on the Foster Ranch and the military's quick explanation of a simple weather balloon. For many people, the most compelling and dramatic part of the mystery centers on a second location, an alleged crash site much closer to the town of Roswell itself. Settle in and let's explore these unsettling accounts. While Major Jesse Marcel and others were focused on cleaning up the wide debris field 75 miles away, the presence of military guards and a tight cordon much closer to Roswell suggested to some investigators that something else entirely must have happened in the immediate vicinity. Why would the military block roads right near town if the crash site was so remote? The security only made sense if a craft had impacted closer to the base. According to these subsequent accounts, a second crash site was allegedly found approximately 35 miles north of Roswell. This was supposedly the main impact zone where the craft itself had come down. Witnesses claimed that the craft found here was much smaller, perhaps 15 to 25 feet long and more or less intact, though damaged. It was near this site that the extraordinary claims of recovered alien bodies began to surface. One alleged eyewitness, Jim Ragsdale, later claimed in an affidavit to have seen the ship crash 50 miles northwest of Roswell and described how the military quickly arrived to remove both the damaged alien ship and its dead crew. The most detailed and disturbing testimonies came from civilians who were close to those responding to the event. For instance, the family of a Roswell fireman, Frankie Rowe, claimed her father came home excited and upset, describing what he and his crew had been called out to see at Blackwater Draw. They were expecting a normal plane crash, but found something that was not an airplane and was not from this world. Her father told his family that when they got there, they saw that there were two small bodies laying on the ground outside of the craft that were dead. And even more remarkably, there was one what he called little person walking around who was still alive. When Frankie's mother asked what they looked like, the fireman said they were very small, about the size of a small 10-year-old child. The heads, he said, were too large for the bodies and had no hair, with large eyes. They would have large heads, large eyes, and small mouths with no ears or noses, only nostrils. The fireman emphasized that the live being was very sad, and you could feel the hurt from this little person who was so saddened by the death of the others. He also stressed that there was no need to be afraid, because they weren't here to hurt anyone. The bodies, allegedly 5 in total, were described by many witnesses in a similar way. They were 4 feet tall and had pale skin. At first they appeared to be naked, but they were actually wearing very tight-fitting suits made of a fine metallic cloth. After recovery, the bodies were said to have been covered by sheets and then placed into lead-lined body bags. These claims suggest the military was handling not just strange wreckage, but biological remains. This is supported by the story of Glenn Dennis, a local mortician who had a contract with the air base. Dennis allegedly received a very odd request from the military for child-sized coffins. Furthermore, he later encountered strange debris and was confronted by officers at the base hospital while he was aiding an injured airman. The officers told him he had seen and heard nothing. He was threatened that if he opened his mouth, they would be picking his bones out of the sand. These severe threats were similar to those used to silence the rancher, Mac Brazel, and Sheriff Wilcox's family. Other military personnel were also allegedly involved in securing and moving the bodies. Accounts mentioned that after the bodies were recovered, they were sealed into a long crate, which was transported to Hangar 84 at the Roswell Army Airfield, and left there overnight under heavy guard by military police. Lieutenant Walter Haut, the base public relations officer who issued the initial flying disc press release, later claimed in a sworn affidavit to have been taken by Colonel Blanchard to this secured area, Hangar P3, also known as Building 84. Haut said he saw the recovered object there, which he described as 12 to 15 feet long and 6 feet high, resembling an egg with a metallic surface, but having no windows, wings, or landing gear. He also saw a couple of bodies under a canvas tarp. He noted that they had large heads and were child-sized. The movement of this extraordinary cargo happened under strict secrecy, often at night. Witnesses described military vehicles moving quickly in the dark and armed guards watching as aircraft were loaded for transport. Special flights, sometimes B-29s or C-54s, were loaded with crates of varying sizes. The military even told the flight crews that they were simply flying the general's furniture to Fort Worth. The destination of this highly sensitive cargo was first Fort Worth, Texas, but then quickly onto high-security military sites like Kirtland Air Base and Los Alamos. Ultimately, the remains of the craft and the bodies were allegedly shipped to Wright Field in Ohio, which was a top-secret military base responsible for examining enemy aircraft. The entire operation was handled with ruthless efficiency. The impact sites were allegedly swept clean, with troops shoulder to shoulder, picking up every last shard of wreckage. All participants, civilian and military, were debriefed and told that the recovery was a highly classified event and that they must forget that it ever happened. This deep and lasting secrecy around the body recovery and the shipment of the wreckage is one of the key elements that has convinced so many that the government recovered something truly extraordinary, something not of this world, and that they have been hiding the evidence ever since. Chapter 5. The Project Mogul and High-Altitude Crash Test Explanations. Rest your mind now, as we turn away from the mysteries of the desert wreckage and the accounts of strange bodies, to focus instead on the official explanations that emerged decades later. For 31 years after 1947, the story of Roswell lay dormant, a mere footnote in history, until the late 1970s when the retired Major Jesse Marcel finally spoke out, claiming the military had covered up the truth and switched the debris. This resurgence of the story and the subsequent books and television features, like The X-Files, brought the incident back into the mainstream. By the 1990s, the public pressure and congressional inquiries became too great to ignore. In 1993, a United States congressman from New Mexico, Stephen Schiff, launched an inquiry into the incident, directing the Air Force to conduct an internal investigation. The Air Force, which had previously asserted that it had no interest in unidentified flying objects, suddenly decided to reinvestigate the Roswell case. In 1995, the Air Force released its findings in a report titled Roswell Report: Fact versus Fiction in the New Mexico Desert. In this report, the military admitted that the original weather balloon explanation given in 1947 was a lie. However, the new report did not confirm a flying saucer. Instead, it concluded that the material recovered by Major Jesse Marcel from the ranch was actually from a super-secret surveillance program known as Project Mogul. Project Mogul was a military surveillance program developed to detect the signatures of Soviet atomic bomb tests. Balloons equipped with acoustic sensors called transponders were launched to high altitudes where sound moved faster, allowing the military to theoretically detect a nuclear explosion, even if it happened on the other side of the world. The mission was highly classified, marked as Category 1A, the same level as the hydrogen bomb program. The Air Force claimed that this explained the original confusion and the need for the cover-up. Since Project Mogul was top secret, people at the Roswell Army Airfield, including highly trained personnel like Jesse Marcel, were never told about its existence. The military used a security mechanism called compartmentation, which ensured that each participating entity received only enough information to complete its assigned task. Therefore, Major Marcel and the others were not privy to the existence of Mogul. Their job was to deliver nuclear weapons, not to detect them. The physical description of the Project Mogul array seemed to match much of the debris described by the witnesses. The device launched on June 4th, 1947, which may have been the one that crashed, was large and free-trailing, extending some 600 feet long, which is twice the height of the Statue of Liberty. It used large rubber balloons, sometimes 50 of them, and included kite-like radar reflectors called Rowan targets, which had balsa wood frames covered with silver foil. The debris described by Mac Brazel, rubber, silver foil, and balsa wood matched this description perfectly. Investigators found a rational answer for the unusual hieroglyphic symbols Major Marcel's son described seeing on the small I-beams. The Brooklyn Toy Company commissioned to make the radar reflectors used kids' Scotch tape to secure the paper-backed foil to the balsa wood frames. This Scotch tape featured flowered patterns set in a purple dye. After baking in the desert sun, the tape would have peeled off, but the purple dye would have imprinted the wood, leaving behind flowered patterns that looked like strange, foreign writing to the witnesses. To most scientists, Project Mogul became the rational answer to the Roswell mystery. However, the 1995 report failed to satisfy the public because it didn't address two key points: the destruction of the 1947 records and the claims of recovered alien bodies. The Air Force had stated that records such as finance, supplies, and general administrative matters from 1945 through 1949 were destroyed. To answer the lingering questions, the Air Force issued a second report in 1997 titled The Roswell Report, Case Closed. The second report aimed to explain the persistent eyewitness reports of recovered alien bodies. The Air Force concluded that the recovered alien bodies were actually crash test dummies used in high-altitude parachute tests. The project was codenamed Operation High Dive, which involved dropping hundreds of 6-foot-tall dummies from various heights to determine survivable fall parameters. The military noted that sometimes these dummies were discovered burned or damaged, with missing heads, arms, legs, or fingers, which could have led to them being mistaken for 4-foot-tall aliens. However, this explanation was met with extreme skepticism, mostly due to a critical timeline inconsistency. Critics quickly pointed out that in high-altitude parachute tests, the project was codenamed Operation High Dive, which involved dropping hundreds of 6-foot-tall dummies from various heights to determine survivable fall parameters. The military noted that sometimes these dummies were discovered burned or damaged, with missing heads, arms, legs, or fingers, which could have led to them being mistaken for 4-foot-tall aliens. However, this explanation was met with extreme skepticism, mostly due to a critical timeline inconsistency. Critics quickly pointed out that Operation High Dive did not start until 1953, which was 6 years after the Roswell crash. The Air Force offered a vague explanation for this gap, referring to it as time compression, which essentially meant that people got the dates wrong, or that the memories of the event were blended with later events. Some researchers mocked this idea, pointing out that the Air Force seemed to be quoting a 55-year-old man about something he saw when he was 5, implying sloppy investigation. Despite the Mogul and crash dummy explanations, the public and many investigators remained unconvinced. They argued that asserting the outcome and then having investigators fill in the details is a common government tactic, regardless of how ridiculous the details might be. They noted that while the Mogul explanation addressed the wreckage, it did nothing to account for the secrecy and the threats of death made to civilians like Frankie Rowe and the Wilcox family. Skeptics of the official report maintained that if the military had only recovered a high-altitude balloon, it would have been a mundane event and not something that required death threats and the swift movement of the alleged material to high-security bases like Wright Field in Ohio. Thus, the official military explanations released in the 1990s succeeded only in confirming that the original 1947 story was a lie, but they introduced new inconsistencies that only fueled the deep-seated public distrust of the government. For many, the refusal to completely open the files, coupled with the convenient destruction of records, provided further proof that the real truth about a non-earthly craft remained under lock and key. Chapter 6. Forensic Authentication of the Marcel Journal and Site Investigation. Now that we've explored the crash, the cover-up, and the official explanations, let's settle into the final chapter of our story, focusing on the modern, quiet search for physical evidence. Decades after 1947, investigators and researchers are still working to get to the bottom of the Roswell mystery, trying to apply 21st century technology to a 70-year-old riddle. One of the most promising avenues for new research involves Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer who was the first to investigate the wreckage. Marcel became the man at the center of the claim that Roswell was a cover-up. After he died, his family found a journal, a small army portfolio, hidden among his military records. This journal, a small piece of history, was never shared by Marcel with anyone while he was alive. His family believes the journal is a crucial piece of evidence that could change the entire story of what happened in Roswell. A former intelligence officer and investigator named Ben Smith took on the mission of trying to verify and decode this mysterious artifact. The journal contains entries that span the period of the Roswell Incident from 1946 to 1948 or 1949. However, the journal's contents proved confusing. While some of the handwriting is in beautiful cursive, other sections shift to an erratic, mixed-case, blocky lettering. The entries themselves are strange, sometimes reading like quotes from a magazine, like, "Life is what you make it," until someone comes along and changes it. Investigators wondered if it was written by two different people, or the same person in a different mindset. Since Marcel was a seasoned intelligence officer, researchers theorized that he might have written in code or used a mnemonic device to prompt his recall of sensitive information without explicitly stating, "I just found a UFO." This cryptic writing could be a way to hide information, especially since he had been warned never to reveal the truth about the unidentified flying object. To verify the document, Smith sought forensic analysis. A leading forensic document examiner, Jennifer Nasso, was tasked with determining if the journal was genuine or forgery. Her process involved static dating, which looks at the introduction dates of certain elements of the paper or inks to see if they were available during the time the document was supposedly produced. After weeks of testing, the results were quite clear. The ink lines were consistent with non-ballpoint pen ink, which would not have been available until after 1950. Furthermore, the paper itself did not contain optical brighteners, a feature added to paper after 1950 to make it look white. The journal even contained a unique watermark which led investigators to Juniata, a university in Pennsylvania, where Major Marcel attended and later taught one of the first intelligence schools right after the war started. This consistency verified that the document was an authentic artifact from the correct era. The most stunning news came from the handwriting analysis. By comparing the cursive script and the block printing, the expert concluded that both the cursive script and the printed sections were written by the same person, Major Jesse Marcel himself. The difference in handwriting was attributed to a change in mental state, perhaps due to the intense stress and blowback he experienced from being the face of the government's lie in the newspaper. The journal was genuine. However, this authentication only raised more questions than answers. The mystery now is what the cryptic writing means. Researchers believe that if the strange entries are a type of code or cipher, cracking it might reveal Marcel's private thoughts about the crash, the materials, and the cover-up. Meanwhile, other investigators returned to the desert itself, seeking clues in the very ground where the debris was found. Even 70 years later, researchers hoped that using modern, state-of-the-art technology might uncover fresh evidence that something more powerful than a balloon crashed there. A team of archaeologists and geophysicists visited the location considered to be the most significant crash location in the entire history of the phenomenon. The team, which included Bill Dolman, who had conducted previous archaeological digs there, wanted to use new methods to look for physical evidence. They first used drone technology and multispectral imaging to look for unnatural features or straight lines in the soil that might suggest an impact or a skid mark, while old aerial photos suggested linear features that matched witness descriptions of something falling from the sky and scattering debris. The modern imaging didn't show any distinct anomalies, though the researchers did conclude that the archival image might have had a defect. Next, the geophysicists deployed a magnetometer, a tool that detects changes in the Earth's magnetic field. The idea behind this was that if something really hot hit the Earth, that heat would hit the reset button on the soil's magnetic field. As the soil cooled, it would take on the Earth's magnetic field at that exact time, allowing researchers to date the impact event. After many hours of searching, the magnetometer found an interesting magnetic anomaly, a patch of ground with unusually high magnetic readings. This finding was significant because the location of the anomaly was the same orientation as the alleged original furrow in the ground. Investigators concluded that the most likely candidate for this anomaly was remnant magnetization due to heat, suggesting that the soil had been heated up at some point. Archaeologists then collected soil samples from the anomaly site. The purpose of this was twofold. First, to rule out routine earthly causes, such as a campfire or a prehistoric site, and second, to send the samples to a lab for analysis to see if they contained metals not from the area and possibly not from this world. If the magnetism of that soil could be dated to 1947, it would freeze the signature of the impact to the time of the crash. Additionally, the team had brought a gamma-ray spectrometer to measure for radioactive material. anything that has been in really high altitude or space would, first, to rule out routine earthly causes, such as a campfire or a prehistoric site, and second, to send the samples to a lab for analysis to see if they contain metals not from the area and possibly not from this world. If the magnetism of that soil could be dated to 1947, it would freeze the signature of the impact to the time of the crash. Additionally, the team had brought a gamma-ray spectrometer to measure for radioactive material. Anything that has been in really high altitude or space would be exposed to more radiation, which would stay with the material when it hit the ground, providing a strong, permanent signature. The question remains, what did all these efforts find? Did the soil analysis prove that a highly advanced craft, possibly made of alien material, hit the desert? Or did the lack of clear evidence and the strong explanation provided by Project Mogul confirm that the debris was nothing more than balsa wood and tin foil? The sources confirm that the crash site investigations are underway, but the definitive lab results on the soil analysis and the final decoding of Major Marcel's journal remain the missing pieces of the intricate puzzle. Today, the story of Roswell endures. It's a mystery that exists in a careful balance between skepticism and wonder. While the official government reports tried to assert the outcome that it was merely a series of high-altitude balloon projects and crash test dummies, the fact that the government had to lie and use extreme intimidation tactics to silence witnesses is what keeps the story alive. Whether the truth lies in the memory metal and hieroglyphic symbols, or in the purple-dyed tape of a secret spy balloon, the search for the final answer continues to quietly draw people back to the vast, silent deserts of New Mexico. Thank you for joining me on this quiet journey through the history of Roswell. If you found comfort here, if this story helped you relax, please take a moment to like this video. It helps more than you might realize, especially with how the YouTube algorithm decides what to share with others. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, gentle explorations of American history, mystery, and memory, consider subscribing. I'll be posting new videos every week, so you'll always have another story waiting for you at bedtime. Now, settle in, knowing the mystery is complete for tonight. The lights above New Mexico fade into the quiet sky, leaving behind only wonder, curiosity, and the calm of the desert night. Sleep well, and may your dreams drift softly across the stars that have always watched over Roswell. And if you're still awake, that's all right too. Let your breathing slow, let your body rest, and know that the next story will be here waiting for you soon.